Hello and welcome to the second episode of the series titled Introduction to European Paganism. I am your host and speaker, Stefan Cvetkovic, author of Slavic Traditions and Mythology and other books, and in this episode we will examine the concept of divine honor among the pre-Christian people of Europe. But before I continue, I would like to inform you that when I finish with these lectures, they will be published as a book under the title Introduction to European Paganism, which will be available on Amazon like the rest of my books. Therefore, you will be able to eventually own a physical copy. The tribal lifestyle of our European forebears did not have any laws like we do today, but laws which were regarded as customs and which were inseparable from their divinities. Therefore, moral behavior was not determined by laws, but by the respect of the customs and by being a respectable member in the society, by having honor. These tribes had a population of not more than several hundred individuals, and the tribe is by definition simply an extended family where everyone knows each other and passes through the same rites of initiation. In such a society, there is no room for corruption, for deception, greed, cowardice, theft, lies, and murder, because such behavior would bring dishonor not only to yourself but also to your family, and even to the gods for not obeying the customs, or rather for going against the divine customs. It is simply an impractical way of behaving in a society where population is so dependent on each other and on each other's support, because it makes you a member who is not trustworthy, and thus dangerous to the survival of the community, which was already enough to have you expelled from the tribe. This is why our forebears had various ways of dealing with such people, such as having them pay a fine in horses, cattle, or coins to the person or family they harmed, such as banishing them from the community for a year or more, and return if they survive the punishment, such as confiscating their property and making them outlaws, which simply means that they were outside the law and could be lawfully killed by anyone, or simply by executing them. The Roman historian Cornelius Tacitus tells us that the Germanic tribes hanged the traitors and deserters on trees, whereas the cowards, the unwarring and bodily infamous men, i.e. sodomites, were plunged into bogs. The distinction in the punishment was apparently to make a public example of the offenders of the community, whereas deeds of shame should be buried out of sight. In the medieval Slavic tradition, from the Eastern Slavic area, in particularly Russia, we find a similar custom in which the criminals were hit in the head with a club called Perun's club, and their bodies were thrown in a river. Similar ways of execution existed all over Europe, and they could have been performed in the name of the highest deity of the tribe, such as Perun in the Slavic case, who represented the highest principle of order and justice, according to which the cosmos and the society was arranged. As such, we can say that the criminals were sacrificed to the gods of justice, and according to some authors, the act of blindfolding and tying up the hands of criminals before execution, which can be observed in our modern times, stems from our pre-Christian past. The purpose of these customs was to get rid of the harmful and dishonorable members of society, not only in the present moment, but also in the generations to come. Because at the core of our pre-Christian tradition lies reincarnation, and in order for a person to reincarnate, he would have to be buried or cremated according to the customs, and have his name and legacy remembered, which was obviously not the case for the criminals, because they were not worthy of it. Naturally, the crime rate in the past was higher among the civilized and overpopulated societies, whereas among the barbarian tribes it was lower. Such small societies survived to our times, and I'm sure many of us had grandparents or great-grandparents who grew up in villages where everybody knew each other and trusted each other so much that they could even leave the doors unlocked during the night. Honor was therefore valued above everything by our forebears, not only because it brought good reputation, but it also had a religious aspect to it, which was related to the possibility of reincarnation. This is why honor, glory, fame, luck, and happiness can in some European languages be described by the same word. In the Old Norse tradition we have the word Hamingia, which translates as walking in shapes, while in modern Icelandic it means simply luck, fortune, or happiness. The shapes in this case refer to the bodies in which the spirit is reborn, or rather through which the spirit walks, because although the body dies, a person's honor is linked to his spirit, to his essence and real self. And when the spirit is reincarnated, that is to say, takes on a new physical shape, the person's honor is restored in his new life and manifested as courage, wisdom, kindness, nobility, and not least, luck and happiness. This Hamingia is personified and appears as a benevolent female spirit that follows a person throughout his life, protecting him from harm and ensuring good luck. The Hamingia is not just a personification of the personal fortune, but also of the family's fortune, because the Hamingia is essentially you, a force accumulated by your honor and the honorable deeds of your forebears, which nourish and inspire you, which is why you can personally contribute to making your Hamingia grow by performing honorable and glorious deeds. The Hamingia is also called Fylgja, meaning simply follower, and Fylgja is also a term used for the placenta, thus making the concepts of luck and fate inseparable, as explained in the previous lecture called Fate in the Native European Tradition. This protective spirit or tutelary deity, the personification of one's personal and family honor, is what the ancient Romans called genius or genius, from which we have the term genius today in English. The name genius simply means inborn nature, and it is derived from the same root that gives us the word generation, essentially meaning to beget, produce, or give birth to. Another word which also stems from the same root is the Latin word gens, meaning a family consisting of individuals who share the same nomen or surname and descend from a common ancestor. The genius is therefore the essential, heritable spirit or divine essence and the generative power that spreads throughout the gens and each of its members. The domestic rituals related to the household deities in the ancient Roman society were performed by the oldest man in the household, called pater familias. He, as the singular lawful head of a family, derived from a gens, embodied and expressed its genius through his fulfillment of ancestral obligations. In other words, he represented the sum of the ancestors. Aside from the existence of a genius of the household, ancient Romans had a genius called genius loci or genius loci for other objects and places, natural or man-made, which reflects a deeply animistic idea. As we have seen, the concept of a protective spirit of the individual and the kin is of course derived from our pre-Christian ancestral cult, and with the acceptance of Christianity, this benevolent spirit became what we today call a guardian angel. The guardian angel in Europe is a successor of the benevolent spirit, not only as an idea but also in iconography, since the image of the Christian angels is directly inherited from the pre-Christian genius, the Hamingia, fairies, and so forth. The main difference is that the pagan predecessors of the angel could appear in animal forms, such as snakes or birds, both of which are symbols of the ancestors. The bird, having wings, especially contributed to the iconographic development of the guardian spirit, as it was the first being with which the spirit of the dead was symbolically identified. The word spirit means breath, and in the Slavic languages the word for spirit, duch, for breath, dach, and for air, vazduch or vozduch, are related as well, because the spirit is said to enter the body through the first breath of the child, and to exit the body through the final breath of a dying man. The spirit flies away and is identified with migratory birds who during winter were said to reside in the evergreen realm of the other world, only to return in spring, like the spirit returns when it is reincarnated. Hence why in the iconography of the Tree of Life in Europe, we always find birds sitting on the branches. Hence also the popular image of the stork carrying a newborn baby. This is also related to the prehistoric practice of excarnation. Before the burial, the dead were left outside, so their flesh was eaten by the birds, and by doing so they became the birds, so to speak. One of the places in Europe where excarnation was practiced is the Mesolithic Lepenski Vir culture located on the border between Serbia and Romania. It is also there that we find the oldest houses with fireplaces in Europe along the coast of the Danube River. What is especially valuable about this culture is that they buried their dead, or parts of them, under the threshold, under the floor, and especially under the fireplace of the house. A similar situation can be observed in the region of Brittany in France, where in the Mesolithic some of the dead were buried under the fireplace. But unlike the case of Lepenski Vir, this hearth was not located in a house. When I was visiting the prehistoric museum of Karnak in France, I read about these burials a simple description saying, under the hearth a slab. Once the stone is turned over, antlers appear. They are resting on a human skull, forming a kind of a crown. This is very important because it shows that the cult of the fireplace in Europe is inseparable from the ancestral cult, and it provides us with archaeological evidence through which we can trace the cult of household deities, that is to say, the genius, the Hamingia, and related spirits, back to the Stone Age. Likewise, it shows why the house in our fairy tales and myths is a symbol of the womb of the mother, which can also be seen in Neolithic sculptures from the Balkans, where the womb of the mother goddess is literally a house. This explains why the hearth was the domain of the woman in the house, as well as the ancient goddess Hestia and Vesta, and why figures representing the ancestors are usually found around it. I have written about this extensively in my book Slavic Traditions and Mythology, so if you want to learn more, I suggest that you read the book. The tradition of burying the dead under the house did not cease to exist so easily, but in later times the custom evolved to burying the dead or the progenitor of the family on the property of the family. Nevertheless, we have evidence that, for example, the ancient Romans buried their dead family members under the floor of their house. We also know that although many people in Europe practiced cremation, the ashes of the dead were collected in urns in the shape of houses, following the same prehistoric concept. Slavic graves from both pagan and Christian times are recognizable by having a house-shaped tombstone or wooden structure above them. In fact, it is well until the 19th century that in some regions of Serbia the people buried under the floor of the house a red string the length of the deceased as a substitute for burying the person. As previously said, this prehistoric burial custom is the origin of the mythical beings representing the personal and family honor. But they are also the origin of the Balto-Slavic and broader European belief in a benevolent snake which guards the family, also its treasures and the overall well-being of the house. And this snake lives under the threshold, the fireplace, or somewhere around the house. and if anyone kills the snake, it would mean the death of a family member. As such, the snake represents the sum of the forebears, hence why, when it was later anthropomorphized and became a mythical being which today we know as domovoi among the Eastern Slavs, it had the physical appearance of the man of the house, who is none other than the paterfamilias. This also explains why on many ancient frescoes the lares and the genius are accompanied by snakes. In the Slavic tradition, the term Slava means glory, honor, fame, reputation, and celebration. And it is inseparable from the term Slovo, meaning word, because the fame, the honor, and glory is maintained through the word. If one is renowned, he will be spoken of by his descendants, and thus his memory will be preserved forever. His glory has made him immortal. These two words are the root of the word Slavic. Like among other Europeans, in the Slavic culture the house was also seen as a temple of the household gods, and the fireplace was their dwelling place. The household altar always stood near or around the fireplace, upon which were placed various ceremonial items related to the holidays throughout the year. Among them was a wooden idol or several idols representing the ancestors, usually made of wood and usually male because the inheritance was passed down to the male lineage. The females were simply initiated into the ancestral cult of their husbands, following various rituals. With the spread of Christianity, these ancestral idols were replaced by wooden crosses and icons of Christian saints, as in other parts of Europe where the patron saints are the successors of ancestral divine figures. However, it is only the Serbs that have preserved the pre-Christian ritual called Slava, but simply coated with Christian paint. Each family has its own patron saint, protector of the family, whose icon hangs above the fireplace of the house. This saint and his icon were in the past the progenitor of the family and his carved image, or an image of the highest chthonic deity Veles, as the Serbian ethnologist Veselin Čajkanović has shown. And it was the embodiment of the family Slava, i.e. the honor of the family and each individual. The person who performed the main rituals on this holy day was the man of the house, like the ancient Roman paterfamilias, which involved the cutting of the bread, the ritual around bread, and the wine libation in front of the idol. Wine is related to ceremonies of ancestral veneration due to it being a substitute for blood, and the dead need to be fed with it in order to be reborn, the same way the baby is nourished by the blood in the mother's womb. Among the Germanic people, such libations were offered to Wodan, among the Serbs to Veles, also called Trojan or Triglav. And we can see this by the order in which the libations were given. The libations are accompanied by prayers and blessings, and the first one is dedicated to God, with the saying that the Slava is dedicated to him, whereas the second is dedicated to the patron saint of the family. God, in this case, is the mythological chthonic progenitor deity Trojan, representing the sum of the ancestors, whereas the saint was the progenitor of the family. We can also find an analogy in ancient Greece, where the first toast was dedicated to Zeus, and the second was dedicated to the heroes, that is to say, the ancestors. As previously said, the patron saint was the personification of the Slava. And according to Serbian and South Slavic belief, it is either the patron saint or an angel that follows a person throughout his life, often sitting on his right shoulder, like the Roman Genius and the Norse Hamingia. We do not have a pre-Christian record of how this being was imagined among the people, but it is very likely that it was the same as the Norse Hamingia and Roman Genius, since the image of the angels that we know are a part of our pagan heritage. This benevolent guardian spirit was simply an ancestor, But it is also possible that it was symbolically represented as a villa or samovila, which would be the equivalent of a fairy. I mentioned these beings in the previous video called Fate in the Native European Tradition. Their role in the folklore is very diverse, and most researchers agree that they stem from the pre-Christian ancestral cult. And they indeed often do have such a protective role in the South Slavic epic poetry, where famous heroes have such fairies as blood sisters, who they call upon when they are in danger and who simply give them advice on their adventures. One such famous hero is Prince Marko, a character whose mythical origin I have explained in detail in my book Songs and Legends of Kraljević Marko. The concept of a benevolent guardian spirit was known among the ancient Greeks as well, who called it Eua daemon or Agata daemon, meaning noble spirit, and in whose name they drank or poured a libation of unmixed wine. But the ancient Greeks especially put an emphasis on the concept of kleos, that is to say, glory, which was inseparable from the cult of heroes. Kleos, or glory, fame, slava, could be earned through honorable deeds, but especially through courage in battle, and the kleos could also be passed down to others. Like among other Europeans, the kleos was passed from a father to his son, whose duty was to carry on the glory of his forebears. The term is also often present in names of ancient Greeks, such as Sophocles or Heracles, where the second part, kles, is derived from kleos. We can observe the same situation in Slavic names such as Borislav, Radoslav, or Svetislav, where the second part, Slav, is derived from Slava, that is, glory. Greek hero cults developed from the ancestral cult, but were distinct from the clan-based ancestor worship in that they became a civic rather than a familiar affair. And in many cases, none of the worshippers traced their descent back to the hero any longer. The written sources emphasize the importance of heroes' tombs and the temenos, or sanctuary, where chthonic rites appeased their spirits and induced them to continue to favor the people who looked to them as founders, of whom founding myths were related. The hero would help those who lived in the vicinity of his tomb or who belonged to the tribe of which he himself was the progenitor. In ancient Greece, cities and sanctuaries claimed to possess the remains of venerated heroes as a part of a hero cult. Other venerable objects associated with the hero were more likely to be on display in sanctuaries, such as their weapons, their chariots, ships, furniture, clothing, and so forth. This is essentially the same as what was done in the ancestral cult, where it was not only the deeds of the progenitor and the ancestors that were glorified, but also the objects that they possessed were kept as sacred. They were kept either in the temple of the community or in the family home, where they were passed on from one generation to another. Miracles and healing were not regularly attributed to them, but their presence was meant to serve as a tutelary function, and especially awaken memories of previous lives among the descendants of the progenitor. Later on, Christians adopted this practice as well in relation to their saints, whose relics are still being kept in many churches and monasteries. The Christian hero is a martyr. Heroes played a central role in the life of a polis, giving the city a shared focus of its identity. And thus we can say that the development of a hero cult is related to the development of civilization. Because although the members of a city might not be related by blood and do not venerate a divine ancestor, they venerate a divine hero. The cult typically centered on the heroon, in which the hero's bones were usually believed to be contained. In a sense, the hero was still alive because he was offered meals and was said to be sharing feasts. Heroes did not ascend to Olympus or become gods, but were in many cases regarded as messengers between the gods and men, same as the Christian angels, the Roman genius, the Hamingia, and so forth. The hero was simply beneath the earth, and his power purely local. For this reason, hero cults were chthonic in nature, same as ancestral cults, and those of chthonic deities, involving libations in the dark hours rather than burnt offerings. A Pythagorean saying advises not to eat food that has fallen on the floor, because it belongs to the heroes. And Slavic people consider that the food has fallen because the dead are hungry. Both of these beliefs essentially stem from the prehistoric ritual of burying the dead underneath the floor of the houses. But although the Greek hero cult is known from the ancient Greek culture, renowned heroes are known across all of Europe, and many of them feature in songs, tales and myths which once belonged to ancient deities or ancestral figures. Therefore, in a way, all European tribes venerated their heroes because their deeds earned them immortal fame, but also because they could be the progenitors of the tribe. And in a way, we are all descendants of these heroes, having their deeds inspire us and aid us. There are different types of heroes, and the most famous ones are known as folk heroes or national heroes, who sacrifice their lives for their people. This is a type of hero who may be a historical person or mythological person, or a historical person placed in a mythological context. Their name, personality, and deeds are embedded in the consciousness of a people, mentioned frequently in folk songs and tales, regardless if the person was a pagan or a Christian, since the concept of heroism survived the conversion to Christianity. The lives of folk heroes are generally mythical. Such a hero can begin his life as a normal person, but is transformed into someone extraordinary by significant life events, either in response to social injustice or an encounter with a mythological being, and so forth. One major category of folk hero is the defender of the common people against the oppression of the established power structure or against an invading force. This category of heroes would include the most famous dragon slayers of our myths, such as Heracles, Siegfried, Yarilo, who after the conversion to Christianity became heroes like Saint George, whose myth was very popular among medieval Europeans. The Serbian epic poetry recognized the heroism of medieval noblemen such as Kraljević Marko, Miloš Obilić, Knez Lazar, and many others, who chose to die in battle fighting against the Ottoman forces rather than live as slaves to the enemy. And it is because of this reason that their names were immortalized and even replaced the pre-Christian heroes in the epic poetry, who fought against dragons and other mythical creatures. Later on, when Serbs engaged in battle against the Turks, they summoned their dead ancestors by calling their names to aid them in battle. But they also summoned these great heroes. This is a practice which also survived the process of Christianization. All of the honorable heroes from our traditions died for an ideal, because courage has to have a noble and selfless goal in order to be divine. A hero is not a violent and bloodthirsty individual, because heroism is noble, pure, and innocent. A hero does not kill out of pleasure, but out of the love for the ideal of justice and honor. Heroes are not only people who have risked their lives in battle for the good of their community, but they can also be culture heroes or founding fathers. A culture hero is often mythological and specific to a group of people who changes the world through invention or discovery, and sometimes does so through self-sacrifice. A typical cultural hero would be the discoverer of fire, agriculture, poetry, tradition, law, and so forth. Certain deities had the role of cultural heroes among their people. For example, Odin among the Germanic people. He's a cultural hero for his discovery of the runes through self-sacrifice. In the South Slavic tradition, the god Veles appears as various saints, or even as the devil, and he teaches the people the art of smithing, making cheese, fermenting milk, medicine, and many other things, for it is said that he is the master of all crafts. But probably the greatest culture hero of mankind is Prometheus, the titan who stole the fire from Zeus in order to give it to the people. A hero which opposed someone stronger than himself for the sake of those weaker than him, and ended up as a martyr of his own ideal. Aeschylus tells us that everything people know they were taught by Prometheus, who was the first to show them how to build houses, how to build ships and use animals to work in the fields. He also taught them medicine, then the divination through dreams and the flight of birds. Likewise, he was the one who found iron, gold and silver for men and taught them all the skills to build their industries. But for this he was punished by Zeus, who bound him to a rock and sent an eagle to eat his liver. His liver would then grow back overnight, only to be eaten again the next day in an ongoing cycle. Many condemned Prometheus for teaching humanity things which nature would not allow, but the poets of antiquity regarded him as the ancestor of all other heroes. Heroes are essentially people who have achieved something that gave them great honor, great fame, and their memory lives forever. But in reality, anyone can be a hero by cultivating that which is honorable in him. And more so, anyone can be a hero in many cases. A hero is not only someone who risks his life, but it can be a hero in many small and seemingly insignificant cases of noble heroism. As such, each and every one of us should cultivate a character of nobility, of courage, love, and wisdom. But it is also important to be terrible and ruthless if the situation arises. The Stoic philosophers pointed out two of their famous maxims. The wise man is happy and everything belongs to the wise, pointing to the wise man as an example of all people, because although they might not have anything else, they still exceed in honor. The greatest good is indeed honor. Our honor is the only thing that cannot be taken by anyone, and nothing else is really ours. The only thing we really have is our honor, and one should live and die with it. As stanza 76 in the Hohomol says, "Cattle die, friends die, you die the same way yourself. But I know one thing which never dies, an honorable reputation." An old Roman writer said that the success of the corrupt people is the misery of the noble ones. And this is true. Very often we see that corrupt, dishonorable people have as much luck, or even more, than honorable and good people, which causes confusion and even leads to atheism. However, noble people simply have a different type of luck than corrupt people. Even the worst person can be successful in wealth, health, love, family, and so forth. But he will never be lucky in his spiritual well-being, that is to say, in his honor. Noble people have honor and glory even when they lack fortune, and glory is the greatest fortune of all. A man is glorious, famous, and honored in his environment only if he is a respectful example, such as Plato, who was renowned for his wisdom. One should not envy the crooked people for their wealth and success, but the good people for their honor and glory. Too much success can even bring the worst to people, causing them to worry because they have to protect what they have. Or it can bring them enemies and illnesses because they stop being modest in their words and pleasures. However, honor is not something which man has to protect, because it protects him instead, as we have seen in numerous examples. A man who has everything but does not have any honor and glory, not just in his spirit but even in his morals, and as a member of society, then that is a thoroughly broken man. Because every man can be great if he wants, if not as a general, then as a soldier, if not as a lord, then as a great servant. Our greatness depends on ourselves and our deeds. And in the world that we live in today, full of misinformation and propaganda, even enlightening people to the truth will bring you honor. Autonomy, that is to say freedom, is one of the best type of luck one can have. And like it or not, wealth is a man's way to this freedom. A wealthy man is a man independent from another man, and essentially the system. However, the other half of the luck is something that cannot be bought with gold. Alcibiades was fortunate for being the most beautiful Athenian, and a very good student of Socrates, who was also brave and very healthy. Socrates was happy and fortunate even though he was poor, and he was honored that he was declared as the wisest Greek by the temple of Apollo in Delphi. Likewise, he too was a brave soldier and a noble man. Alcibiades was therefore more fulfilled in wealth than Socrates, but Socrates was more fulfilled in honor, which is more important. There are people who would be happy with just one of these things, but absolute happiness, which is understandable for any other man, is impossible without wealth. Without wealth, there is no freedom, only battle. Because it is what enables man to be independent from everyone else. However, for the healthy, brave, smart and honorable people, even a great amount of wealth is not required. But most people in this world are neither healthy nor brave, nor smart and honorable. Real wealth does not lie in money, but what you can obtain with it, and especially what you are able to make yourself. Skill is not a very heavy load to carry, as the saying goes. And as long as a man can provide his own food, shelter, security, then he will be free, happy, lucky, and not least honorable. That is real wealth. Evil and misfortune in life do not come from the gods, but from man. All suffering among the people is caused by man alone. In nature there is no good and evil, fortune and misfortune, only life and death. And it is up to you what you do with it. Are you going to be honorable and strive for immortal fame, or are you going to let yourself wither and fade into oblivion? Success depends on the responsibility you take in your life. If you do not, you will be a failure, a miserable, depressed and desperate person with no honor. Most people prefer not being free and autonomous because they do not want to take responsibility of their own lives and would rather live in a golden cage provided by their government. This is why most people don't care about anything but their comfort and ability to consume, because they are a tree with no roots which is doomed to fall. They don't care about their homeland, their people, the future of their children, nature or the world. Nothing. They will revolt in order to get things back to normal only when it's too late. And all people share the same flaws, but not the same greatness. And this is the real difference between human garbage and honorable people. We should judge people by their greatness instead of their flaws. But only our friends judge us by our greatness, whereas our enemies will always judge us by our flaws. In reality, every man is ready to be a bandit at any given time. But not every man is ready to be good and honorable, because that demands more wisdom than instinct. Philosophy, as well as our tradition, teaches us that real blessing lies in the modest life, meaning a life of self-denial, or rather self-sacrifice. And self-sacrifice for a greater ideal is what characterizes any hero. And in truth, try to deny yourself something that you think you cannot live without. Detach from it, and you will see how all of a sudden you will feel more self-confident. Then let go of something else, and you will see how you will feel stronger than your enemies. Very often man is manipulated by his enemies, of which he might or might not be aware, such as the system. By being threatened of having his pleasures or freedoms taken away if he does not bend over and do what he is told. Very few people let go of these things without any hesitation, for they know that what they have cannot ever be taken away from them. And an honorable man, who has nothing to lose, cannot be threatened into submission. So show yourself that you can live with half or less than what you own, rather than always chasing for more. Show yourself that you can be content and feel stable and powerful with living in the countryside, working for yourself, having few friends and being satisfied with simple pleasures. And in the end you will see how it is possible to replace the vanity and all the unnecessary consumerist pleasures which we confuse with happiness, with moral and spiritual values such as modesty, temperance, courage, honor, justice, wisdom and love. You will see that life has real meaning. Thank you for listening. I hope that you enjoyed this lecture, and stay tuned for the third part of this series, which will be due in a month. Till then, take care.